The serpent was the shrewdest of all the wild animals the Lord God had made. One day he asked the woman, "Did God really say you must not eat of the fruit from any of the trees in the garden?" "Of course we may eat fruit from the trees in the garden," the woman replied. "It's only the fruit from the tree in the middle of the garden that we are not allowed to eat." God said, "You must not eat it or even touch it. If you do, you will die." "You won't die," the serpent replied to the woman. "God knows that your eyes will be open as soon as you eat it, and you will be like God, knowing both good and evil." The woman was convinced. She saw that the tree was beautiful and its fruit looked delicious, and she wanted the wisdom it would give her. So she took some of the fruit and ate it. Then she gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate it too. At that moment, their eyes were opened, and they suddenly felt shame. The things I think that I say and I do that do not please God are called my sin, and God will not let sin come in to be with him. The things I think and I say and I do that do not please God are called my sin, and God will not let sin come in to be with him.
And you know what? Even though you guys got taken all down there, I think for this story, why don't I create extra chaos and invite you to come up and just sit here around me, and I will tell you this story, okay? But you got to sit nice and quiet if you're going to sit up here, okay? Come nice and close. Make lots of room. Yeah, that's okay. It won't go anywhere. You can sit right down. Sit right down. I wonder if you know this story. This story, Shiloh, do you want to come sit on my knee and hear the story? You got to be quiet, though, if you're going to come up. You're going to come up here? All right. This is a story that happened long before there was Christmas. So long ago. You want to sit here? You going to sit with Mama? It happened in a time when people lived in tents in the wilderness. And it happened to an old man whose name was Abraham. Do you know how old Abraham was when our story happened? Who wants to guess? Caleb thinks he was 100. You think he was 90. He was older than 90. He was older than 100. Do you know how old he was?
120.
Almost. He was 113 years old. 113. And Abraham had a beloved son, a son of his old age, a son of promise. And this was a very special son. Now, all sons should be special to their dads. I have sons, and my sons are special to me. And it wasn't just because he had had a son when he was old that the son was special, but God had made some special promises to Abraham. God had promised Abraham that through his son, he would have many, many nations. That means that his son would have to have kids, and his son's kids would have to have kids, and on and on and on it would go until there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. But listen to my story. This is what the Bible says. Listen. And I want you to listen carefully so you can hear what happens here. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, "Abraham?" And he said, "Here I am." And God said, "Take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you." How do you think Abraham felt about that? He probably felt pretty sad, right? So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, took 2 of his young men with him, and his son Isaac, and he cut the wood for the burnt offering, arose, and went to the place which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to the young men, "Stay here with the donkey, and I and the boy will go over and worship and come again to you." How old do you think his boy Isaac was? Hang on, I'm going to see if I can get this to stop doing that. Okay. How old do you think he was?
Like 13.
That's exactly right. He was 13 years old. Do we have any 13-year-olds here? How old are you, Wyatt?
13.
You're 13. Stand up for a minute, Wyatt, just so everybody can see what a 13-year-old looks like. There's a 13-year-old. You're pretty strong? Can you run for a little while? If I told you to go run, do you think you could run?
Yeah.
Yeah, you could run. Okay, sit down for a minute. Do we have any 113-year-old men here today? Any men who are 100? No? How about 100-year-old men? Do we have any 100-year-old men? Have we got any men here who are 90 yet? Getting closer. How many men do we have who are in their 80s? We got a couple 80-year-old men. Do you guys mind standing up just for the sake of the kids for a second? So here we got Mr. Jack and we got Mr. Pierre. These men are in their 80s. You can sit down, guys. These guys are spring chickens compared to old Abraham. I'm going to ask these guys, do either of you guys think that you could beat Wyatt in a race today? Jack, no? Pierre, do you think you could beat Wyatt in a foot race? Do you think you'd like to race him? Well, this is an interesting thing because, Abraham was way older than these men, and Isaac is just a young man, and Abraham probably by this point just wasn't very strong anymore. It was hard for Abraham to do things, and so the Bible tells us, this is what it says, "And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering." If you're going to have a burnt offering, you have to have an altar, and he was going to build the altar out of the stones that were up on the top of the mountain, but you're going to have wood and of a mountain, so they have to take the wood with them. And he had to carry the fire with him because they didn't have matches in those days. And he had to carry the knife with him. And so this is what happens. "And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac, his son." Who carried the wood up the mountain? The dad or the son? The son, right? The son carried it up. "And he took in his hand the fire and the knife, and so they went both of them together. And Isaac said to his father Abraham," what do you think Isaac's going to ask him?
What are we going to burn? What's the sacrifice?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Hayden. He says, "My father," and he said, "Here I am, my son." He said, "Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" And Abraham said, "God will provide for himself a lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And so they went, both of them, on together. Who was carrying the wood up the side of the mountain? Young Isaac, right? Because old Abraham probably couldn't carry that much wood anymore, so he had his son carry it up.
Probably couldn't barely walk up the hill.
What do you think Abraham was thinking? Here's the problem. Abraham knows two things. Abraham knows that God has made a promise that through Isaac there will be many, many, many descendants. That means Isaac has to live. But he also knows that God has told him to take Isaac up on the top of this mountain and to sacrifice him. What do you think Abraham thought God was going to do? Anybody have a thought of what Abraham was thinking? How could God fix this? What do you think? Is there a way? It's pretty tricky, isn't it? Do you know what? The Bible tells us in the book of Hebrews, it says, "By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, through Isaac shall your offspring be named. Now listen, he considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. Now, I want you to think again for just a minute about the difference between Wyatt, here, who's 13, and our two spring chickens, who are only in their 80s and not anywhere near the age of Abraham. Abraham was so old that he couldn't carry that wood to the top of the mountain, so Isaac had to do it. But then we read this in verse 9 of chapter 22 of Genesis. When they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Wyatt, stand up again for a minute. I want you guys to see a 13-year-old. Okay? Now, Wyatt, if some man who was 113 years old and couldn't run very fast decided he was going to tie you up and put you on top of an altar, what do you think you would do?
Die.
You would, well, if he actually succeeded to do that, you would die. But do you think you could run away?
No.
You don't think you could run away from one of these fellas?
Yeah.
You don't think you're fast enough? I think you are.
Yeah.
Now, if he did manage to get you tied up, how is that old man going to get you up on top of that altar? That's a lot of weight. I mean, you're not a huge guy, but these older fellas, especially 113-year-old men, do you know, when you ask the question, you think, how did Isaac end up tied up and lying on the altar? And I think there's only one answer. What do you think?
Got up onto it and then father time.
I think the only way that Isaac ends up on the altar is that his dad had to say to him, Isaac, here's what God has told me has to happen. And I think Isaac said, okay, Father, I'm willing to do what you've asked me to do. I'm willing to submit. I trust that God has a plan. I think that's the only way, because how in the world can a man who can't even carry the wood up to the top of the mountain tie up a boy and put him on the altar? You sit down. You're doing a good job. And so here's the climactic moment. This is the moment. Ready? Everybody looking at me? The altar has been built. Isaac is lying there on top of the wood. And poor old Abraham takes the knife. And the Bible tells us that as he raised up the knife, the angel of the Lord called from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And Abraham said, here I am, Lord. I'm listening. What do you want me to do? And the angel said to him, do not lay your hand on the boy, for now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And so instead of having to kill his son and offer him as a sacrifice, Abraham cut him loose. And when they turned, they found a ram, which is a big sheep, caught by its horns in the thicket, and that became the substitute. And there Abraham and Isaac stood, and they worshiped God together, and they offered that sacrifice. And you know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years later, one of Isaac's great descendants, a man named David, who was king of Israel, climbed up to the top of that same mountain. And there on the top of that mountain, he purchased the land and offered to God a sacrifice. He bought the land from Arona the Jebusite, and he marked out that land for the future temple. And the temple of Israel that was built on Mount Zion was built in exactly the place where Isaac had been spared by God. And that is the story for today. Back to you.
a village in Galilee, to a young woman named Mary. She was engaged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of King David. Gabriel appeared to her and said, "Greetings, favored woman, the Lord is with you."
Confused and disturbed, Mary tried to think what the angel could mean. "Don't be afraid, Mary," the angel told her, "for you have found favor with God. Everyone has sinned. We all fall short of God's glorious standard. But God showed his great love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners. Jesus, Son of Man, Son of God, he had done no wrong, he had never sinned. He was arrested on false charges and sentenced to death, abandoned by admirers, mocked and beaten by soldiers. They brought Jesus to a place called Golgotha, which means place of skull. They offered him wine drugged with myrrh, but he refused it. Then the soldiers nailed him to a cross. They divided his clothes and threw dice to decide who would get each piece. It was 9 o'clock in the morning when they crucified him. The sign announced the charge against him. It read, "The King of the Jews." At noon, darkness fell across the whole land until 3 o'clock. Then at 3 o'clock, Jesus called out in a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you abandoned me?" Then Jesus uttered another loud cry and breathed his last. And the curtain in the sanctuary of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. When the Roman officer who stood facing him saw how he had died, he exclaimed, "This man truly was the Son of God."
Saturday, everything when the Sabbath day ended, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Solomon, went out to purchase burial spices so that they could anoint Jesus' body. Very early on Sunday morning, just at sunrise, they went to the tomb. On their way, they were asking each other, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" But as they arrived, they looked up and saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled aside.
When they entered the tomb, they saw a young man clothed in a white robe, sitting on the right side. The women were shocked, but the angel said, "Don't be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He laid his body. Now go and tell his disciples. Jesus had taken our punishment for sin and conquered death."
Ray of hope in a hopeless world. Who can we turn to? Where is our rescue? There is someone, he's the answer. He's the light and he'll light the way. His name is Jesus, and he came to save us. He is the light, 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 light of the world, and he shines all over the earth, shining bright, bright, bright. He is the light of the world. He is the light, 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 light of the world, and he shines all over the earth, shining bright, bright, bright. He is the light of the world. The world is searching for an answer, a ray of hope in a hopeless world. Who can we turn to? Where is our rescue? There is someone, he's the answer. He's the light and he'll light the way. His name is Jesus, and he came to save us. He is the light, 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 light of the world, and he shines all over the earth, shining bright, bright, bright. He is the light of the world. He is the light, 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 light of the world, and he shines all over the earth, shining bright, bright, bright. He is the light of the light of the world, and he shines all over the earth, shining bright, bright, bright. He is the light of the
Did you guys, a little bit less, there we go. Did you guys like that story that I told you today about Abraham and Isaac? You know, not everybody likes that story. In fact, there was once a man and a woman, very famous man. The man's name was Martin Luther. And Martin Luther had a bunch of little children, and he was telling his little children the story of how Abraham had taken Isaac, and God had told him to sacrifice Isaac up on the top of the mountain. And his wife was listening in, the mummy, and she came in and she said, "Martin, stop it. Stop telling this terrible story. She said, Martin, I don't believe it. God would never ask a man to sacrifice his own son. And you know what Martin said to her? He said, but Katie, he did it. He did it. God didn't make Abraham sacrifice his son, but in order to save you, God sacrificed his own son. And that is the most important story that you will ever hear. We're going to conclude our service today singing together number 182. And I'll tell you what, I'll invite you kids, if you want to go find mums or dads or grandmas and grandpas and sing from your seats there, that would be just fine. And the rest will stand together as we sing number 182, Good